Hi everyone and welcome to One Autistic Person. This is the 36th video in a 50 video series that I'm doing in relation to the statements of the Autism Quotient. The Autism Quotient is a pre-screening tool that is often used as part of the autism assessment process. And during that process, like anybody who's gone through the process, you'll have seen that the statements and the way that it's looked at, everything's looked at as a deficit. And what I wanted to do with these videos originally was to flip the narrative and to look at things from a benefit perspective or from how we can put adjustments in place. What they've kind of morphed into is kind of me explaining how I experience these things, because the statements kind of get a bit repetitive. So the end 25 have seemed to have morphed more into sort of saying how I experience these things and maybe what they could be, and me researching options of what possibly is happening there. And then me giving that information plus any advice that I can give in relation to any adjustments or mitigations that I can put in place. But everything I do on this channel is about looking at things in a positive light, but also from a shared experience perspective. So this is the 36th statement, and the statement is, I find it easy to work out what someone is thinking or feeling just by looking at their face. And I definitely disagree. So with all of these questions, it's how I answered the question, and then I'm going to look at why I answered that question, because I think context is a bit difficult sometimes with these statements, especially when you're going through that process. So for me, empathy is very much about two things. So understanding how someone is feeling, or that someone is feeling a certain way about something in a given situation, and also how I should react to it. So how am I perceived within that situation? What should I do in relation to the person feeling that way? And I think the biggest problem that I have is, my understanding is that a lot of people like to sort of say I'm okay if you ask if they're okay, and not then mean that. But if they say no, they don't want to talk about shared experience. And I think this is where I fall down, because I kind of want to, if I say that I'm not okay about in a situation, I kind of then want it to be a conversation around potential solutions, and that then means information sharing. For me, I'm going to need empathy on very different things than somebody may do who is neurotypical. So for instance, I might, from what could be perceived as a very minor social interaction, need a lot of discussion afterwards and a lot of empathy and understanding of the fact that social interaction, although to that person may not be complicated, for me was extremely complicated, and I might not be able to know what was truly meant by that. Whereas, let's say I was diagnosed with a medical condition, I would want to research all of that. I wouldn't want anybody interrupting me with it. I'd want to have a look at everything I possibly could, build up at all the understanding that I possibly could about that, look at what prognoses are, what treatment plan options there are, and I'm not going to really want other people's opinion or other people to be sort of like asking me if I'm okay, because that's then going to stress me out. So it could be that those shared experiences sometimes, for me, I don't really need that shared experience in that. I want to know factual information in that situation, and it can kind of flip around. And I think it's just that sometimes that sharing information bit can be a bit of a problem. So I have a lot of lived experience, and my best friend has lived experience, of course he does, but he has also a lot of researched experience. He researches a lot. So from an empathy perspective with me, if I'm struggling with a situation and I talk to my best friend about it, we will talk about my lived experience, but we'll also talk about his research that he's done into things, and then that will open more sort of thought process up to it. And vice versa, if he says he has an issue, then I'll talk about my lived experience with him, and he'll link his researched experience to it. So I've just realised that over the last few months that the empathy for me is a lot around sharing information, whether that is lived or it's researched information, but it's definitely an information-based thing. I don't want somebody to go, oh, they're there and give me a hug or anything like that, or it's not. That's not what it's about. It's not about feeling sorry for me, but it's about talking it through with me, I suppose. And I can know something is wrong in a situation, but I don't know what it is. And although I am feeling that feeling quite deeply, so I can feel a really negative or a really positive emotion, so I can feed off somebody else's information. I'll be happy because somebody else is happy, But on the flip side of that, I can really feel people's negative emotions quite a lot, and that can then dysregulate me to the point of irritation and maybe even to the point of meltdown, which can mean that my response, if somebody's in a negative place, can actually be what would be perceived as quite a selfish response. And maybe it is, I suppose, but it's not meant to be. It's not because of the fact that I'm being selfish. It's the fact that I am actually feeling that emotion and I don't understand it due to things like alexithymia. That makes it very, very difficult for me to understand, as well as not understanding the fact that I'm feeling somebody else's emotion. I'm kind of taking it all on me. It's not really a matter of not having empathy, but more of a matter of not knowing the person expects it or how they want me to respond to that need as well. So it's not a matter of not feeling anything. It's quite the opposite of that. I feel a lot. I just don't know how I'm supposed to react to it. And I'll often try and react to it in the best way that I think is possible for that person, but it can differ. And especially when you don't know the person very well. So say it's a work colleague that you don't know that well. I don't know how I'm supposed to react to it because I don't have this standard automatic reaction of how empathy works. What this has led me to do is kind of have a look at there's sort of two different types of empathy, or there's perceived to be two different types of empathy. So I'm just going to have a look at those. There's cognitive empathy and there's emotional empathy. So I'm going to have a look at cognitive empathy first, and then we'll have a look at emotional empathy. So cognitive empathy is described as the ability to understand and perceive the emotions of another person. It's also known as empathic accuracy or perspective taking. This requires you to imagine how the other person may feel, putting yourself in the other person's shoes as such. Understanding and comprehending how that person would feel in a given situation, and be able to relate to the way they feel, even if their experiences are different. And I think that might be where the problem comes with this, is that I will overanalyze how somebody else might feel in a situation and come out with because I'm not able to pick up on the other things. So I really, really do find it a difficulty to put myself in somebody else's shoes. I have a perception of a person, and they socially fit into a box for me, that's how they're going to react. So if they react differently to the way that I expect them to in a situation, I then get very confused by it. I then don't generalize how they would feel, and then I kind of dehumanize myself and them at the same time to an extent, where it's that I can't understand why they're feeling the way they're feeling because it's not what I expected them to feel. And I have such a narrow understanding of another human being that it makes it very difficult for me to be able to show them empathy or show them that I am empathizing with them. And I think it comes down to even if their experiences are different, I think that's true. And it's that comprehending how somebody may feel. It is complicated when you experience the world differently. I feel like I've said that a lot in videos recently about experiencing the world differently, and it's like their experience is different, but if your world is completely different to another person, then how do you link those experiences? Like I said before, I would find a social interaction something that I may need a lot of empathy for, but a medical situation I wouldn't, whereas somebody else may feel it completely differently in the other way around. So how do you put yourself in that situation? So they may have experienced two different things. They may have been diagnosed with something differently, or their social interaction could be completely different, but it doesn't. I can deal with that as long as there is a link there to what I would feel in that situation. And that's the bit that's difficult, is the fact that not only is the experience different, but how that experience was experienced and how it felt internally is different. And I think that's why cognitive empathy is often quite complicated for an autistic person. And it's seen as a skill that can be learned over time, and I agree. I think you can, but I think you learn it based, or at least I do. I learn it based on individual people, not over everybody, because I just find it too complicated to try and understand how everybody else is going to react. Some people act very stoically in situations, and other people don't, and it's so difficult to be able to work that out and what the response should be. It's considered a key component of emotional intelligence, and for me, I hate the term emotional intelligence, because I think that I get what it means, but intelligence implies a natural ability, in my view. So I kind of would refer it to an emotional skill set rather than intelligence, because intelligence needs a base level of understanding, and a base level of having the ability to be able to do something. So I don't feel it's emotional intelligence. I think it's an emotional skill set, or an emotional arsenal, or whatever you want to call it. It's something that is built. If it is built up over time, a skill set is learned, whereas intelligence is sort of starts off in an inherent place. So yeah, I find cognitive empathy extremely difficult. And what I'm going to do now is have a look at emotional empathy, which I think is slightly easier and sort of relates more to the way that I experience things. And then I'm going to have a look at the difference between somebody who is an empath and somebody who is empathetic. So emotional empathy is probably something that's generally seen as more intrinsic to that person, and something that is instilled within them. So somebody who has emotional empathy is someone who is highly sensitive to the emotions of others and who can experience those emotions on a deeper level. They're able to sense subtle emotions, emotional shifts, and unspoken feelings. And this can be taken on without knowing, which I would say is the way I experience emotions. I can feel that something's wrong. I can know that there is how somebody's feeling, but not understand why. For me, this can be draining emotionally without knowing why it's happening. But I'm able to look back and relate to it afterwards. So I'm able to go, oh, maybe that's what was happening. But it takes me sometimes days to be able to do that. This is different with empathy being with empathy and being an empath are kind of different. I used to associate it with being sympathetic and empathetic, which leads me to the next section, which looks at being an empath and being empathetic and being an empath, because I feel like that's important to sort of. Being empathetic to me is different to being an empath. Being empathetic is something that is a process that happens that you're aware of, whereas being an empath is something that can be, you can be aware of it and work on it. But I think being emotional empathy is more about being an empath rather than being cognitive, giving cognitive. A cognitive empathetic response. So yeah, this is quite a complicated one for me, because I do feel those subtle emotional shifts and unspoken feelings, but I don't know why. Which means I obviously am taking in what's going on around me, because that's from things that are happening. I don't believe you can just feel it, but I'm not understanding the concept of why that is. So I'm hyper aware of what's going on around me all the time. So I feel something's wrong, but due to alexithymia, can't understand what it is, or I feel like somebody's happy and I don't know why. But I'll follow that emotional lead of the group. And if everybody else is feeling downtrodden, I really struggle to keep people. I would really struggle in a situation to keep people up when everybody's down. If there's one or two people there that I can feed off, then maybe I'll be able to do it. And I will probably hone into that positive emotion. But if there's a lot of a negative emotion in a room, I'll also feed very much off that as well. And I could become very drained if I'm in a room full of, let's say, 10 people, and let's say 6 of them were in a negative view and 4 were in a positive. I'd probably end up feeling very much in the negative side, because I would be having slight emotional knocks that were happening from every interactions with the negative side. And I'd even argue that sometimes just one negative person in that room, if they're persistently negative, I struggle to be able to push through that and be able to even feed on the other 9 people. So yeah, I want to have a look at the difference between what I consider an empath and somebody who's empathetic, and then that will sort of clarify to me the difference between cognitive and emotional empathy. So there is a difference between being an empath and being empathetic, in my view. And when I've researched it, it looks like there is a consensus to that. So an empath is someone who feels the emotion, but it can be without any understanding of why. This can be all emotions, including anger and anxiety, and can really have a major impact on a person. And it can include getting to the point of burnout. I think the thing with being an empath, it's great if you are an empath that is able to be empathetic. So being an empath is the feeling, being empathetic is the response. So being able to feel the emotion and be able to understand what's going on and have that side of it, that's being an empath. Being empathetic is your response to it. And I think the missing link here for me, of how I can feel that, but I'm really struggle with knowing what I should be able to do is alexithymia, not understanding my own emotions. I clearly can't understand my own, so how can I understand what I'm feeling when it's from somebody else? And especially when you're not really understanding it because you're not understanding the social cues that are causing you to be able to feel those emotions of somebody else. So if you are noticing subtle changes in people's social cues, but you're not actively thinking about it, and that you've not logged it and thought that's why that it's that person is feeling that way, and then sort of being able to go and look at it, unless somebody is openly negative, I don't read like somebody's body language being sat looking like they're negative. I've had people come to me and say that person was sat in that meeting, they were clearly sat and annoyed and were feeling quite negative about it, and I've had no idea. So social cues come into it. So you've got alexithymia, not understanding an emotion when you feel it. Social cues, not understanding what's going on around you with the people that are around you, but also your brain is still picking up on it. Understanding context. So again, if somebody's not explaining it to you, how do you know what it is that person's feeling and why they're feeling that way? Mutual understanding of how another person experiences that emotion. So understanding why, and also understanding that they are experiencing it and how they're experiencing it and what it's doing to them. All of those things being muddy for me make it so that it allows me to feel it but not really do much about it, and actually makes me act in a way that probably is going to burn out, or is going to have a meltdown or a shutdown, or I'm going to have some kind of physiological response to it in my body, which is not going to allow me to be able to appear to be empathetic. And I struggle with surface level empathy. If you're not really empathizing with somebody, it's very difficult for me to be able to show empathy when I don't actually truly feel it. And I know that quite a lot of neurotypical people are able to show empathy even if they actually don't feel empathy. And being empathetic for me is the response. So it's being able to understand someone's emotion within a given context or situation and respond effectively, but without taking the feelings on personally. And that's the bit that I really struggle with. I take everything on personally. Everything that happens around me, I feel to a deep extent. I feel what's going on. I do take it on my own shoulders, and I feel everything that's going on. And I think social sensory experience comes into this as well, that you're with your sensory experience being different, being able to respond to it can make it so that the response is so different to what somebody would expect it to be, and even different to what I would think I would give. If it's a reaction that I give straight away without a considered response, it might not be what the person's expecting, but it might even not be what I'm expecting, and I'll have no idea that thing's happened. It'll have passed me by, and I'll have reacted straight away, and that it comes across as not being empathetic. So yeah, being an empath is the feeling side of it, which I feel very much that I have. But doesn't necessarily mean you understand it, and due to all of those things that I said before, it makes it very difficult for me to then show empathy, which is being empathetic. So I think those two things, when you look at them separately, make you realise that actually we as autistic people, we do feel empathy quite strongly, I believe, but how we respond to empathy can be complicated for those reasons that I've given. So I'm just going to have a look finally at the double empathy. It's called the double empathy problem, but I like to call it the double empathy paradox, just simply because I don't like the word problem, and it is a paradox. So let's have a look at the double empathy paradox. So the double empathy problem, or as I said, double empathy paradox, is something that's been researched quite a lot by many different people. But simply put, the theory of the double empathy problem suggests that when people with very different experiences of the world interact with one another, they will struggle to empathize with each other. This is likely to be exacerbated through differences in language use and comprehension. So I would say that this basically explains the issue. It explains the paradox. That when I am feeling that emotion, but I'm not able to empathize with that person, or I'm not able to show empathy to that person. I'm able to be empathetic with that person because the experience I'm experiencing is different to that person. It doesn't mean I don't feel it, and it doesn't mean that I don't want to help. And actually, quite often, I really do want to help. I just don't know how to, and that then becomes an issue for me, which then puts me in a negative place. And if that person's in a negative place, that's two people in a negative place interacting, one wanting help, the other person wanting to help, but then me starting to get to the point where I actually need help myself. And I think to put all this in a lovely tight little package, Donna Williams, who in 1996 wrote a statement, which I'll read in a second. She was an Australian writer and artist of varying different degrees. She grew up in Australia. She was born in 1965, and at an early age was diagnosed as being psychopathic. She wasn't. She was autistic, and she did a lot of her work was around being autistic. She wrote numerous books in relation to this and the lived experience. And for me, this is the biggest problem that we have right now with anything to do with autism. And this is what she said in 1996. She put, right from the start, from the first time someone came up with the word autism, the condition has been judged from the outside, by its appearances, and not from the inside according to how it is experienced. I could not put it better myself. That is the problem with this. This is the paradox of the situation. We're being diagnosed by people who are often not neurodivergent. We're working with people who are not neurodivergent. We're being educated by people who are not neurodivergent. But not only that, they are judging it as a deficit. They're judging it from their version of a deficit. But if you put a group of autistic people together, or a group of neurodivergent people, especially a group of neurodivergent people, because you've still got diversity there, but our brains are all working in a similar sort of realm of life, we probably are going to be much more productive than if you put put us in a group of neurotypicals. One neurodivergent person with a group of neurotypicals often struggle to be able to get the best out of themselves in that situation. I'm not saying that a mixed group doesn't work well, which I from all studies that I've seen, it does, as long as there is an understanding and there's an ability to be able to work with those people, and they'll allow you to. But the point here is the fact that we have been looking at autism, or autism has been looked at from an external perspective from day one. It's been looked at people who are by people who are neurotypical, and looking in on it and looking at it as a deficit because of the fact it has a negative impact on us, or it appears to have a negative impact on us. But as I found, when you start taking control of that, when you start taking control of your sensory experience, when you start taking control of how you socialize, when you start taking control of the way you live your life as an autistic person, actually all of those negatives disappear, and all of the things you loved all along about being autistic become something you love even more, which I love the fact that my brain is autistic. I would not want to change it for the world, but the detrimental effect it's had on me for 37 years is astronomical, which leads me to something that I'm planning on doing myself. So I have wanted to start my own charity for years, and I have never found the cause that I wanted. I love animals, but I didn't want to work with them because I knew how difficult it was. There's many different things that I've looked at, and I've realised that this was probably where I always wanted to get to. I am at a point where I want to start a charity that relates to autistic people, or people who are neurodivergent, being given opportunities in life in a different way to the way they currently are, and that we are that all opportunities are open to us, but in a way that isn't going to be detrimental to us in the long term. So my next video that I'm going to do is going to take a few days for me to put together, but it's going to be going through that and what my plans are for it. So I'm really excited to share that. I've been going through a lot of it over the last 6 months. I've been really trying to put this all together, and I'm at a place where I can now say that, but I wanted to sort of say that I'll be doing it in my next video. So that's going to be my next video. It'll probably be quite a long video because it'll be going through all of what my plans are, and then I've got a separate channel that I will be using to promote what I'm going to be doing with that. But that next one will sort of promote that channel. Anyway, so for me, with the empathy side of things, it's that understanding of the fact that we are feeling things, and sort of, I suppose the only mitigation I can say to put in place is to keep asking people if they're okay, or even say to them, I'm feeling like there's a shift in vibes, or however you want to put it, and say I feel that there's something wrong, but I don't know what it is, and I want to help, and sort of be clear the fact that you want to help and you want to be there for that person, but you may need some guiding through it. That's the only suggestion I have, because we experience the world differently. Therefore, empathy is always going to be something that is going to be paradoxical to us, and we are always going to try and help, but not necessarily be doing the right thing. So asking the person, being clear and saying, what is it you need from me? I'll do anything I possibly can to help you, but I need to know what it is you need from me. So as always, thank you so much for watching my video. If you could like the video, that's fantastic. If you can definitely put a comment on it. I love reading people's viewpoints on this. I'd love to hear how people experience empathy and how they feel they experience empathy, and maybe talking about the double empathy paradox and how you see the difference between empathy and being empathetic. And I, as always, if you can subscribe, it does allow my videos to get out there further. So I would love that. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you on the next video. Thanks. Bye.